Well, welcome everybody to our second Neurosculpting Live Lunch Talk. I'm very excited about today. If you tuned in last week, you know that we are creating this series as a way to bring the conversation of the importance of meditation out to different genres. And last week we talked with a law enforcement officer. And this week I'm very excited to have Dr. Fred Grover with us. Dr. Grover is very, very interesting. He is a very multifaceted doctor, family practitioner, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, family practitioner who specializes in integrative medicine, anti-aging medicine, restorative medicine, brain health, preventative neurology, and the list goes on and on and on. And when I first heard about what Dr. Grover was doing, it was in the context of some really amazing projects that he'll share more about later that he's doing with veterans around PTSD. But really what caught my interest was the fact that you are quite the bridge between the meditative world and Western medicine. And so I wanted to ask you just if you could describe maybe a little bit for our viewers about who predominantly makes up your practice? Who comes to see you?
Yeah, my practice is very diverse. I'd say I have a fairly small pediatric component. The majority of my patients are aged 30 to probably 65. Most of them are very proactive in their health. They really want to stay well, stay out of the hospital. They're looking for opportunities to improve their nutrition, opportunities to balance their hormones. And many of them are, of course, scared about mild cognitive impairment and other neurologic issues that we see on the news every day, whether it's multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and other neurodegenerative conditions. So what I try to do is approach things from a very integrative standpoint, mind-body integration, natural therapies, hormonal therapies. Of course, I still do modern medicine, so if somebody has horrible diabetes, I'm not going to withhold insulin and other medical treatments that are needed, but if I can treat it in a natural way and get an optimal outcome, that's the way I'm going to go.
So how representative are you of what's currently happening in the medical field? Are you a renegade doing this on your own? Because I have to say I haven't really met a lot of doctors like you. I've met a few, and I can say a few.
Yeah. I would say I'm definitely somewhat of a renegade. David Perlmutter considers himself to be a renegade in the neurology field. I consider myself to be a renegade in the primary care, preventative medicine, anti-aging field, because I'm really kind of moving much further forward than the traditional medical practice in terms of bringing all these therapies together and looking way outside the box in terms of what we can do for brain health. I definitely embrace mindfulness and meditation and try to bring that into my practice with every visit, at least by encouraging patients to incorporate it into their spiritual lifestyle or into their daily lifestyle, just to help them stay balanced so they're able to function in this crazy world that we live in.
And that's a perfect segue, because I want you to really talk, as much as you'd like to talk about it, your experience with meditation, because it's vast and you have a very robust practice. So I would love for you to share a little bit about how you first got started with your mindfulness practice, what it's brought for you, what it's done for you, and how you start to weave it into your Western medicine practice. Because really for me, this is what's exciting.
Yeah. My journey, my spiritual journey into mindfulness and meditation, it's a long journey, but I would say that my initial journey probably became apparent via my connection to nature. My father was very much into the outdoors, actually got me involved in scouting adventures at a young age, and I was very much into backpacking, hiking, climbing mountains, and connecting with nature and being alone frequently. Hiking, I think, allowed me to kind of connect to the energy of the world and realize the importance of spirituality and quietness and nature in my life. And
so this was all in place before medical school?
All in place before medical school, probably before the age of 10 even. I then, was active in the church, but in a very limited way through the family. But I always felt that my spirituality was looking for something more deeper and more direct to source rather than going into an institution and sitting and listening to a sermon. So I got a lot more in terms of my spiritual development out on my own with nature. And then as I grew older and began to explore more, travels to Europe, travels to Southeast Asia, and that developed further. Probably my biggest quantum leap was in 1996 after I finished residency, and my wife and I decided that we were going to do a trip around the world. We took a year off and decided to do a fair amount of volunteer work while we were doing that. Did parts of Europe that we hadn't seen before, and then decided to volunteer in Nepal for about 6 weeks. And during my time in Nepal, I became very activated, I believe, by the Himalayas, by the Buddhist and Hindu culture that was there, by the energy of the stupas and the people, particularly with the people that I worked with when I was volunteering in some of these small health clinics that were up in the Himalayas. I really developed a deeper sense of compassion that I couldn't develop when I was in the residency program, seeing 30 patients a day and writing prescriptions. And I realized that there was something more to life and more to medicine than simply writing prescriptions, and connected deeply to the Nepali people. And then while I was in Kathmandu, I decided, I'd love to experiment with meditation, and found a Buddhist monk nearby that took the two of us into circle, and that was my first entry into meditation, and then it's continued to grow since then. The cool thing is I've gone back to Nepal multiple other times and have had more chances to connect with people, to do more volunteer work, and to meditate in places like Tengboche along the Everest Trail, and to hang out around Swayambhath and other stupas. And it's just been incredible in terms of the way that's really elevated my spiritual awareness and my ability to meditate more deeply.
And your wife is meditating with you?
She does. She's not a daily meditator like I am, but she tries to do a fairly good job. She's a physician as well, and runs the entire neonatology unit at Children's Hospital, so it's a little more challenging for her. For example, she's on call all night tonight, so she won't be meditating. She'll be attending to poor babies that are having issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how have you seen your meditation practice weave into your patient practice? How does it inform what you do with patients, and then how does it translate into things your patients can take home with them?
That's a great question. I would say, from the standpoint of the meditation I do, it keeps me more grounded, allows me to feel more balanced when I'm in that doctor-patient relationship. And when I'm evaluating a patient and I'm sitting there, I'm definitely feeling like I'm able to intuitively perceive what may be going on with them rather than just listening to their story. I'm also trying to sense what might be going on with them, either in a cardiovascular or GI system, or even a metabolic genetic aspect. There's amazing things that I think you can get through the enhancement of medical intuition through meditative practice. And so that element of improving my ability to diagnose and treat is enhanced by meditation. And then I feel that by knowing what meditation can do for me, I can hopefully, in the right individual, motivate them to consider a mindful practice. And it doesn't have to be sitting down in a lotus position in a traditional meditative fashion. It can be just going out for a walking meditation in the woods. It can be, if they're highly religious, going to their church and doing more prayer and connecting in a prayer circle. Or it can be doing other things such as sound therapy, which I also enjoy doing, listening to mantras, things of that sort. So I think everybody's going to have their own personal path, and as long as you can encourage them to find the path that fits them appropriately and allows them to grow, then that's the way to channel.
Nice. So I guess I want to know a little bit more about the empirical health benefits of meditation. I mean, I think I know them, but I would like to discuss them for the audience. What benefits to the body are we going to experience when we add in the meditation to our health regimen?
Yeah, another great question. Lots of benefits, and there's been hundreds of studies, I think at least 50 studies that have been fairly well scrutinized and have the level of evidence that can demonstrate efficacy and objective data that show the benefits. And one of the benefits is you're going to improve your parasympathetic nervous system activity, which is the relaxation type activity. The sympathetic is the fight or flight activity where we're running from the grizzly bear. But the parasympathetic is we're chilling out, our blood pressure's coming down, our breathing's improving, we're getting deeper breaths, we're just feeling more in tune with the earth and ourselves than worried about the next thing that's going to happen in our life. So meditation enhances that parasympathetic activity, lowers your blood pressure, it improves something called heart rate variability, which we can even monitor medically. So if I know that somebody's meditating well, including myself, I'll hook myself up sometimes to check it. I'll look at my HRV, as we call it, heart rate variability, and I'll know that I'm getting into the zone, and if I'm not, then that heart rate variability won't be there. The other thing that happens besides lowering blood pressure and improving your breath work is you get a lowering of cortisol levels. And we know that by lowering cortisol levels, we're balancing the adrenals and we're reducing some of the negative effects of cortisol in the brain. We know that stress and cortisol can make us fat. We know that stress and cortisol can also shrink our brain and cause brain atrophy. And that's one of the biggest concerns I have in terms of our American public is all the stress that we have from the news and all the other things that are going on economically. We're absorbing some of that, and we're suffering, some major mental health issues as a result of the cortisol effect on the brain. And sometimes it may be memory issues, but other times it can be manifested by an anxiety disorder. If you've had a major trauma, you've witnessed a murder, it can be manifested by PTSD, and all of these things can be calmed by meditation. The other really cool thing that I'm watching quite a bit in terms of empirical evidence and benefits of meditation is that it may actually thicken the gray matter in your brain. There's some good studies demonstrating that, and it may be as small as like 0.004 inches or so of your brain, but that can amount to a significant improvement in your cognitive capabilities, your mathematical processing, your memory, etc. So if we're thickening your brain through meditation, that tells us that we're enhancing neurogenesis. How is that happening? Again, I think it's partly related to lowering cortisol, but there may be some other growth factors that are being promoted, like insulin-like growth factor, that help those neurons connect and become a little bit more robust in terms of all the little dendrites that are being sent out. And I think as we continue to look at some of the markers in brain health with further research, we'll be able to say, yeah, this is what's really happening. But right now it's still a little bit difficult to evaluate that.
Thank you. I do know of a study that was fairly well received by the Shambhala Center a few years ago, where they had taken meditators and measured their telomere length, which is the end points of the gene. They're the start and stop points of the gene, and their quality and length says something, correlates in a way to our health and our longevity. And in that study, I think they had meditators for 6 or 8 weeks, and all of them had increased the length of their telomeres by the end of the 8 weeks of meditation. And I know that one's out there in an empirically validated sort of genre of studies. So I want to go back to the brain for a minute, because that's my area of interest and passion. So we know that meditation is going to positively affect brain health. We know it's going to positively affect neuroplasticity, cognitive ability, memory consolidation, memory retention, growth factors. Tell me a little bit more, because it's not just meditation that balances the brain. So in your practice, you're also looking at hormones. Mm-hmm. So just can you speak a little bit more about hormones as they relate to brain health?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up telomeres, because telomeres are critical and a big part of my practice. And I actually measure telomere length in many of my patients. There's a few different companies that will do that. And I can look at a person's telomere length, which is the end cap of the chromosomes as mentioned, and I can say, yeah, your telomere is appropriate for your age of being 40, or you've got the telomere length of an 80-year-old, we've got to do something major. And sometimes the individuals that have a telomere length that is twice the age of what it should be is related to diabetes, is related to smoking, the stress they're under, the horrible diet, all those different things that can create stress and shortening of the telomeres. The things that we can do to enhance telomeres in addition to meditation are balancing hormones, particularly in those individuals 50 and older, although we do see it in even younger folks. And when I say balancing hormones, I'm not just referring to sex hormones like testosterone that you hear about on the news all the time. We're talking about estrogen in women, progesterone in women, and testosterone. We're also talking about growth hormone, because all of those elements will help in terms of improving neurogenesis and lengthening the telomere. We're also wanting to balance the thyroid, not to just an okay range, but to an optimal range, because we know that the thyroid is critically important in terms of cellular metabolism, detoxification, and keeping you young and healthy as well. And then adrenally, I want to make sure that your adrenal glands are not producing too much cortisol or too little cortisol, so I'll even measure salivary cortisol levels to make sure that you're well tuned there. Now nutritionally, we want to make sure that everybody has plenty of antioxidants in the diet, because we know that free radicals from the ozone we're breathing on these red days here in Denver periodically can create inflammation. So if we're able to nutritionally keep our glutathione levels or CoQ10 levels up, take a little NAC, etc., and then dietarily from food sources, eat plenty of green leafy vegetables, good things like kale and broccoli, and super antioxidant foods like blueberries and acai juice and pomegranates. We can really keep your brain healthy there. Now, the other component that is not so much a free radical, but good for the brain, is the omega-3s and the medium chain triglycerides. The omega-3s are a good healthy fat that will help coat the neurons in your brain, help the glial cells. The medium chain triglycerides, which we get from good old coconut, are great too. So if you like coconut oil, that's a very healthy fat to have. And then actually monosaturated fats like olive oil are great for the brain and also great for the heart. And in general, what's good for the heart is good for the brain, because anything that's improving blood flow to the heart is improving it to the brain and the kidneys and everywhere else.
Great. Okay, so we talked about what foods are good for that. And while I don't want to get into a preachy diet kind of situation, is there one particular predominant thing that is across the board something we should stay away from?
I would say the controversial one, of course, is gluten. And many people, we're going to be either celiac type, which is a true allergy, or we'll have a sensitivity. So I'm not going to preach that everybody needs to go gluten-free, but I will say that everybody should be tested for gluten sensitivity as well as gluten or celiac disease. If you're negative on the sensitivity as well as the other traditional tests, then I feel that gluten can be used in moderation to a mild degree. The other things that we have to be dietarily cautious about in terms of the brain is alcohol. So an occasional alcohol is okay, even up to 1 drink, maybe even 2 drinks a night. But beyond that, alcohol is going to have some negative effects on brain health. Other things, carbohydrates and that's carbohydrates as breads and pastas and things of that sort, are going to cause spikes in your blood sugar. With those spikes in your blood sugar, you're going to create inflammation, and that inflammation is going to be negative for your brain health as well. So try to eat more low glycemic, higher protein foods that are healthy and high in omega-3 fats, and balance that out with plenty of veggies and antioxidants. That's kind of my general approach.
Right, yeah. And that's very synonymous with, you mentioned Dr. Perlmutter earlier, that's synonymous with a lot of his approach. his new book, Grain Brain, that just came out, talks in detail about a lot of what was just said around gluten sensitivity and celiac. And I had the privilege in my class the other day to look at the cerebellum of someone who had died of alcohol abuse. And I have to tell you, it was shocking to see all of the negative space where there should have been robust gray matter, and there was not. It was just shriveled space, and the teacher was noting how that equates to, that loss of motor dexterity and balance and all of these things. And I thought, wow, there it is in black and white, the physical result of the brain injury that comes with the abuse of certain nutrients in the body.
Yeah, we would see that quite a bit when I worked in the hospital, called Wernicke's encephalopathy, and major cerebellar atrophy as well as cerebral atrophy, and of course the liver disease associated with it. Just a horrible, sad picture to witness. And I want to mention that smoking, of course, is bad for your brain too, and more so on the aspect of the vascular disease that you see from that. So you will see cerebral atrophy related to smoking. So for those of you that enjoy smoking, I doubt there's very many on this cast with us that do, but if you have friends that are, make sure they quit, because that's going to shrink their brain as well.
Wow. Could you tell us some of the really interesting projects that you're involved in? I know you're involved in work with veterans. I know you're involved in really amazing work with different brain technologies. I would love for our audience to know more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really exciting part of my practice, and I brought in some advanced components of brain health probably around 2007, 2008 in my practice. And I started with neurofeedback and doing QEEG brain mapping, and that allowed me to look at a person's brain health in terms of their electrical activity on their brain and determining if they had an imbalance that was contributing to anxiety or ADD or depression, and then allowing me and my neurofeedback specialist to be able to treat this condition with something other than Prozac and Xanax. We've had great results with it, and that practice has just exploded. We're busy as can be with that. I expanded out from neurofeedback and realized that, hey, there's some other things that I need to look at besides the electrical activity on the brain, or a CT or an MRI of the brain, and realized that, I need to look at blood flow to the brain more in depth. So I identified a place in Denver called Cerescan that does SPECT imaging of the brain, and that will do an image that will show you all the small vessel blood flow to the brain as it relates to issues to the frontal lobe, temporal, whatever area may be injured, either age-related or if you've had traumatic brain injuries we've seen in many of the NFL athletes and other athletes, or in warriors that have come back from Afghanistan, Iraq, and other war zones, and have suffered huge TBIs as a result of IED explosions or other hits to the head. So we've been using the SPECT image to evaluate some of these poor veterans that are suffering from PTSD and depression that's been resistant to treatment. And we identified several of the veterans from Fort Carson down in Colorado Springs that were really struggling, did a free SPECT image on them, identified the areas that were abnormal, and we realized that we need a treatment modality that will work robustly. And we thought, well, we could do neurofeedback like I've got in my office, or we could do something that's a little bit easier and also very effective. We decided to try a new technology called near-infrared LED therapy. So it's a near-infrared spectrum light, tiny little light bulbs that are applied to the head, the LED bulbs that you've seen like in headlamps, but an array of perhaps 300 LEDs, and a frequency that is near-infrared that will transmit the light through the skull down to a depth of 3 to 4 inches in the brain. And as that light goes into your brain, it has some amazing effects. One of them is an anti-inflammatory effect, so it may improve NRF2 and some of the other factors there that will kind of make the brain feel more relaxed and less inflamed. The other factor is vascularly, or the small blood vessels. It will hit a molecule in the red blood cell and release nitric oxide synthetase, the same thing that happens with good old Viagra, and causes dilatation of those small vessels in the brain, and it improves that blood flow to the area that was damaged from the traumatic brain injury. And we have that, and then the last but not least is we have found, at least in laboratory studies, we're not doing biopsies of brains of veterans, of course, but in lab rats we've shown that neurogenesis, or the connection of neurons and the regeneration of neurons, is also improved, and likely neurotransmitter functions improved. So we've got all these things, vascular, neurotransmitter, neurogenesis, anti-inflammatory, that are all being done by light, and we're not having to give somebody some crazy medication with a million side effects that is probably going to cause more problems than good. So I am just beyond excited in terms of what we've seen with this therapy. What we were able to demonstrate was that in these veterans that we did, we saw major improvement in their blood flow to whatever area was injured. It only took about 18 treatments, and these treatments could even be done at home if they wanted to, and it seemed to hold for a long period of time. We're now getting ready to start within the next month or two a larger trial, similar therapy, another 18 sessions, but we're trying to enlarge the number of people so that we have more power to the study to be able to say to the scientific community, hey, you don't need Prozac, what you need is some lights on the brain, and maybe adding in some meditation, some nutritional components, etc., to heal things up. So I would say probably by late this summer we should have the results of that trial back, and I'm hopeful that we'll see similar improvements. And the best thing was we had guys that were suicidal, homicidal, wanting to kill their wives, that weren't able to work, depressed, and all of those symptoms seemed to resolve completely just by light therapy. And we were doing a little bit of cognitive behavioral mindful type practices too, and I think if we can combine this therapy with meditative practices like you're doing, and nutrition, and dial in all those elements of improving blood flow, improving nutrition, and mindfulness, that will be able to maintain or sustain good optimal brain health. And at some point we may say, well, okay, we need to maintain the light therapy once a week for the rest of your life, or once a month, but those are things we can work at down the road.
That is so exciting for me. I might be sending you some officers in PTSD for sample or for participation in your study, because it's completely in line with how I feel I need to serve the world as well, which is to get those with inescapable trauma a way out. Yeah. And so one of the things that you mentioned was that 18 treatments, and the fact that you're doing this for the veterans, and you're doing this for the veterans for free. You're not charging them, right, but it's costing you quite a bit. Is that correct? This is not cheap?
It's not cheap. We have a great foundation, the Tug McGraw Foundation, which is funding this right now. So if you want to help fund the study, the Invisible Warrior Foundation, or the Invisible Warrior Project within the Tug McGraw is funding it, and then Sarah Scan is performing it. I'm going to be volunteering my time to help treat these patients, and really looking forward to seeing the results. And the nice thing is we're going to do 15 in this next study, and then we're going to do another 2 rounds of 15 is the plan, where we're going to add in meditation and other modalities to see if we have that additive effect, which I'm sure we will see down the road. So
that is so exciting and so fantastic that you're donating your time, and that you have a grant enough to continue researching this work.
We know that we can do genetic testing for predisposition to Alzheimer's through the ApoE3 testing currently, and it doesn't mean that you're going to get Alzheimer's, but it means you're at significant increased risk. I think the most important thing for reducing your risk of Alzheimer's is, number 1, exercise. Number 2, keep your nutrition optimal, as we discussed. Number 3, keeping stress low, and keeping your body mass index, or your body mass index 25 or less, which means keeping yourself as a fairly lean machine, because we know that fat causes inflammation. And then balancing hormones, because we know that from a good trial looking at women in particular, that estrogen reduced the risk of neurodegenerative conditions as well as Alzheimer's by more than 1/3. And I would expect that in men we would hopefully see at least a 10% reduction by bringing up testosterone if it tends to be deficient. So hormonally balancing things and just blending the best mind-body therapies that you can together to give your body a chance to not be more inflamed, because it's not just a genetic thing, it's genetic combined with the environmental issues and the stress issues. So if you can negate or erase those other issues that are controllable, then hopefully the genetic aspects won't be activated. And we feel that there's an opportunity in something we call nutrigenomics, where we may be able to quiet a gene like ApoE3. And one of those things that might be helpful, although we still need to study it more, is improving glutathione levels. And then another thing that may be helpful is reducing or increasing something called NRF2. And we can do that through curcumin. We know that in studies looking epidemiologically at the population of India, that the risk of Alzheimer's is much lower than what it is here in the United States. And it may be that curcumin is creating a less inflamed brain and is very helpful and preventative in terms of reducing that risk of developing Alzheimer's. Or it may be that they have less gluten. We don't really know all those factors, but I would say definitely add a good bioavailable curcumin in your diet as a supplement, and then eat lots of Indian food with curcumin.
And this also aligns with Dr. Perlmutter's diet emphasis as well. And I've been on the NRF2 activator now, which is a supplement made of predominantly turmeric or curcumin and black pepper and green tea and pterostilbene and sulforaphane. And that blend I've been on for about 3 years now, and I definitely felt awake, not in an elevated energy way like coffee would do, but alert, cognizant. I felt like that really helped my brain wake up quite a bit. And you mentioned the other nutritional components, but what I wanted to throw in there was that in a lecture I was at of Dr. Perlmutter's, he mentioned, because he's very committed to this research around Alzheimer's. His father is suffering from Alzheimer's, and that's a very personal crusade for him. But he had mentioned that diabetics are, I believe he said something like 400% more likely to develop Alzheimer's than those who are not diabetic. And so if you look at this idea that type 2 diabetes is preventable through diet and exercise, then a percentage risk of getting Alzheimer's would also then be preventable. If you can prevent the precursor to it, then you might be able to prevent the end result. So I'm really glad you mentioned the diet aspect.
Yeah, diet is huge. Exercise is huge, because you're going to get that blood flow to the brain and reduce inflammation, improve endorphins. And I would say with your regular doc, you want to have your fasting blood glucose checked. You want it to be ideally in the 80s or low 90s. You want that hemoglobin A1C to be nice and low, definitely less than 5.5. Hemoglobin A1C is an average measure of what your blood glucose has been for several weeks, and will give a little bit more information in terms of how well controlled you are. But most importantly, keeping your weight down, staying fit is where you need to be. And yeah, I think it's at least a 4-fold increase in Alzheimer's for people that have diabetes, probably a 2-fold increase in those that have metabolic syndrome, which is a pre-diabetes. So do your best to keep that under control.
Great, thank you. Great question too, thanks. So you mentioned a little bit about pharmaceuticals earlier, about how great it would be to put light into someone's brain rather than Prozac. So where does meditation fit in to battle or combat, or where do these alternative therapies fit in to combat the hold that the pharmaceutical industry might have on other doctors? How easy is it for you to get other docs to listen to you about these alternative methods versus what a doctor knows to prescribe?
Yeah, it's really tough, and I think the challenge is many physicians are in that rut of seeing 30 patients a day. They come home, they're wiped out. They really don't have time to pursue mindfulness themselves, so if they're not balanced, how are they going to be open-minded to mindful interventions such as meditation? But I'm enlightened and happy to see that Dr. Oz and Deepak and Andrew Weil are embracing this, and luckily through their media contributions, we're seeing some elevated awareness amongst the physician community, particularly as patients like yourself are bringing it to their attention and saying, hey, this meditative practice with neurosculpting really helped me out, or just getting out and doing a hike in the woods really improved my depression or my anxiety. Or they may even say that acupuncture was very balancing and helpful. So I think that as we continue to mount further pressure on physicians through the media, and as we continue to develop improved techniques for demonstrating the benefits of meditation, whether it's a functional MRI showing improved blood flow to an area in a Buddhist monk, or thickness in the cortex of your brain following 6 weeks of meditation, then they're going to start paying attention to this, and hopefully things will happen. My concern is that big pharma, the pharmaceutical industry, is going to say, oh, here's some competition for us, and they may try to downplay it just like they've done for many supplements. So we have to be aware of how some of the big industries are going to try to downplay some of the great benefits of some of the complementary integrative medicine interventions. And we have to be hopeful that the National Institute of Health and other great institutes, whether it's the Samueli Institute or Scripps, etc., will have the money to be able to invest in further projects that will look at things like what we're doing with the Tug-McGraw, near-infrared therapy, etc. So I think it's a slow-going progress. Will the Affordable Care Act slow it more? It probably will, because it's just going to cut back more in terms of what physicians are getting paid, and probably make the volume of their patients go up even more. So there might be a little bit of regression. But I think that with the power of the patient and the internet and social media and increased awareness, we're going to see more studies coming out there and more evidence. And as there's more evidence, we're definitely going to see this take off.
And I really am appreciative of those names that you mentioned in the media currently bringing this integrative approach to a mainstream conversation, which is what I'm hoping to do with you here today on a small scale, but where Dr. Oz is doing it, and Deepak and those names you mentioned. And what's interesting is with Dr. Perlmutter's work in Power Up Your Brain, he co-wrote that with Alberto Vialdo, who, as you know and I know, is a steeped anthropological shaman who's been doing shamanic energy work, and that's his contribution to the book. Also, Dr. Perlmutter's wife is a very powerful energy worker. From what I hear, I believe Dr. Oz has either his wife or a connection into that realm, and then Deepak's coming from a mindfulness metaphysical realm. And so I think we're seeing integrated partnerships as well, stepping up powerfully together to bring this message out there. So the fact that you're doing it as one person is very impressive, because a lot of these people bringing it to the forefront are having that partnership complement, and you're kind of doing that as one person. You're the complement as well as the catalyst. So I think that's really impressive.
Thanks. And the nice thing is, I love what Dr. Perlmutter's done, and many of the other integrative medicine physicians. What I'm trying to do is to combine many of the principles of Dr. Perlmutter with my anti-aging expertise, hormone balancing, with some of the nutritional elements of Andrew Weil, and finding that perfect combination that will really enable you to maintain the best brain health that you possibly can. And I think it's always going to be a slightly changing formula, but if we can be flexible and bring in those elements as we find out about them more in our research and promote them, then I think we can make huge improvements. And the near-infrared therapy, I'm hopeful that in a year or two I can say everybody should be doing this to help prevent Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment or treat depression. But at this point in time, we're still in that earlier stage, and all I can say is I'm hopeful at this point. But there's so many things you can do. And I can't emphasize more that having some kind of a spiritual element in your life is crucial, and connecting to that energy I think is huge in terms of the healing you will be able to engage in and continue throughout the rest of your life.
What do you think it will take for other professionals in your field to get on board? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think it's going to take?
It's tough. I think a lot of them need to experience it for themselves. And for me, I've been a little bit of a spiritual adventurer. So I've studied shamanism, for example. I've studied Buddhism. I've done multiple forms of meditation. And if you can find physicians that are open-minded and willing to explore and see what works and what doesn't work, then I think we'll have a shift. I'm hoping that energetically, with what we're seeing in the world and the increased interest, that shift will occur in the physician population too. We mentioned Alberto, who's the shaman, and I was at the Institute of Functional Medicine meeting in Dallas this past year, and I was very excited to see that amongst 1,000 people in the crowd, the majority of them, at least 90% of them, engaged with Alberto in terms of him doing some shamanic spiritual activation. So there was not much in terms of skepticism and great open-mindedness, at least amongst the participants in the Institute of Functional Medicine. So I think as we see more growth in this functional medicine group, the anti-aging groups that I'm involved in, and the integrative medicine groups, which are all growing in terms of numbers and attendance at meetings, I think we'll start to get that critical mass, and hopefully in the next few years we'll really see a tipping point in that direction. But again, we run into the problems of medicine and managed care and not being able to fund mindfulness and complementary therapies, and if physicians aren't getting paid for their time to pursue this or to integrate it into their practices, then they may just not go there. So hopefully we'll see some leadership development in terms of the White House to legislator embracing it more and saying this is important, we need to include this as part of a health plan and part of a wellness plan for everybody.
That would be wonderful. I got to spend some time in the brain lab at the Anschutz Medical Center, and I was in there with some fifth-year med students, and I asked one of them who knew very clearly all the structures of the brain and the vascular system. I said, wow, you really know a lot about structure and function. And she said, yeah, I'm studying really hard. And I said, that's clear. Do you know what you need to eat or what lifestyle practices you need to engage in order to keep those structures healthy? And she looked at me and she said, oh no, nutrition would be an elective after I graduate if I wanted it. So if we're looking at a medical institution that does not necessarily mandate or teach nutrition or lifestyle or alternative therapies, and then we leave it to doctors to have to go get this education after just spending 11, 15 years in medical school and residency, that's really a lot of expectation on the doctors to continually pursue a very committed lifestyle. So I think it would be fabulous to see some sort of mandates come out where we're asking for these two things to merge. It would just, I think it would change the future of our health and medicine.
And I think that some academic institutions, such as the University of Colorado, Duke University, even UCSD California Scripps are bringing in more integrative medicine. In my practice, I'm a preceptor for medical students that are interested in integrative medicine as well as residents. So on a monthly basis, I have a student that's shadowing me and learning about integrative medicine and nutrition, and the interest has been so high that I've had to turn some away. So that's a huge plus, that the medical students are very interested in this, and many of them are looking at the advanced training like I did and other courses to take after the residency, and hopefully they'll actually use it when they get out there and won't just go into some high pain specialty like anesthesiology. Yeah, I would say the A4M has really reached out on an international basis, and they will meet in the Middle East as well as South America, all over the world, Asia of course. And A4M is the American Academy of Anti-Aging, and this group is very integrative. They can be a little bit out there in terms of some of their modalities, but I think their core and their interest in terms of brain health, in terms of integrative medicine, nutritional therapies. The hormone balancing, of course, is huge, and I've learned quite a bit from that group, as well as the Institute of Functional Medicine, and A4M definitely is more international. I think IFM will become more international. It is starting to see a very rapid growth in membership, and will likely play a big role in terms of disseminating that knowledge worldwide. Yeah, they talk it, but they don't walk it, is the answer. And if they do walk it, it's maybe $20 towards an acupuncture visit, or $30 towards neurofeedback, or nothing at all. And it's just crazy in terms of the carve-outs they have for mental health and complementary medicine. So my advice would be, if you can do it, get a health savings account with a high deductible. Now with the changes that are being imposed with the new healthcare law, it's going to be tougher to do that, and the amount that you can contribute to an HSA may be limited, but HSAs give you that flexibility to spend it where you want. Flex accounts are a good plan B, but you have to spend it by the end of the year, whereas a health savings account you can roll over annually.
And one thing I'd like to add is that the more we can do as individuals in a preventative manner, the less we have to be concerned with getting treatment down the road that was preventable now. So again, Dr. Grover just gave amazing information on diet and lifestyle that you can apply right now to your life that will help prevent a lot of these neurodegenerative diseases that cost us so much money in terms of ongoing medications and treatment and healthcare costs. So let's all be as proactive as possible in cleaning up our diet, in cleaning up our lifestyle, and that includes cleaning up our social circles and our thoughts, because the connections we keep, if they're negative connections, stress-based connections that really support a negative view of the world, that will not help the stress level. It will not help you cleaning up a fear-based bias to the world, which does a lot of damage, as we spoke earlier, to your cells, to your DNA, to your vascular system, to your heart, to your brain, to your neurons. So as proactive as we can be is us doing our due diligence. And then after that, it's a matter of, I feel at this point, each of us taking a forward look at being responsible for our health 10 years down the road. Many of us live right now, which is wonderful. And if living right now means we're not being proactive and preventative, then we better think about what's 10 years down the road. Otherwise, we'll be hit with some costs that maybe we can't afford. So because of that, we have to walk away from integrative approaches and resort to what is in front of us, which may be pharmaceuticals, may be a very limited approach to our healing.
It's great commentary, and I think the key is all of us are hopefully going to be living at least into our 80s or 90s, unless we become morbidly obese and develop severe diabetes, etc. With that in mind, living into our later years, quality of life is key, and if you're going to maintain good cognitive function and good quality of life, whether it's your joints or cardiovascular health, you really do have to take care of yourself. And I'd hate to see anybody being stuck in a nursing home or an ICU related to preventable disease. And there are some things that are obviously not preventable, like me getting hit by a Mack truck if it happens today on the way home, or crazy things like that. But the vast majority of things in our lives are controllable from a preventative medicine basis. And as long as you can take action and do the right things in terms of diet, exercise, and mindfulness, you can stay in that zone and you can maintain a great quality of life. In terms of some tips on brain health and nutrition, if any of you want to go to my website, revolutionarymd.com, I have a page, it's just called the Wellness page, and on that page I have a few nice little PDFs that you can download that just have advice for brain health, from meditation to the nutritional things that you can do, and other good lifestyle things to keep an eye on, including cancer screening. So definitely take a look at that.
That's great. Thanks for that resource. What I'd like to do is thank Dr. Grover for spending time with us this morning and bringing this to you for free so that we can just spread this conversation, and you and I and Dr. Grover are all agents of change. This is a ripple effect. So this conversation now continues on through you. And that's the only way it's going to ripple out there. I talk a lot. So now it's time for you all to talk too. And so please share what you learned today. And there are some other resources that I'd like to tell you about. These two audio programs, the Neurosculpting audio programs that are available now for order at Barnes & Noble or Amazon or Sounds True, anywhere books are sold. This is a 2-hour class for Neurosculpting for stress relief. And it comes with some discussion of nutrition and physiology, and then 4 meditations that I will guide you with. I've narrated both of these. And this one, which is a 6-hour immersion, and you can do this in your home at your own pace. There are, I can't even count how many meditative practices there are in this one. And there's a little bit more of a deep dive into the physiology, a little bit more about how the brain holds on to negative bias versus positive bias and what that does for our health. So these are resources for you to actually put a practice into your own life. You can also go to whatever practice you currently have, whether it's deep breathing, exercise, walking in nature, whatever practice works for you. The more you do it, the more it's going to affect a positive change for you. I would like to invite you to look at our free library on the neurosculptinginstitute.com webpage. You can click on free library and give yourself a login, and currently we have about 400 articles. Those are science-based articles, science abstracts on all different ways neuroscience is looking at the brain and what it's discovering about the brain and epigenetics and our ability to remain healthy well into old age, and all of that is free for you. So I value your time and I value your feedback and your questions, so feel free even after this to email whenever you'd like and give us feedback, and I look forward to seeing you again the next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.